My mother-in-law called me a fat, infertile woman and kicked me out of her house. She also said, "My son marrying you was the worst decision ever." My husband did nothing to defend me. But they never imagined I would return for revenge. I was a dreamer then, with a heart as pure as morning dew, always believing I would build a home filled with love and understanding. Life had taught me early on how to mask my pain with gentle smiles, a skill I'd perfected through years of quiet endurance. I held on to a belief, perhaps naively, that sacrifice and patience were the cornerstones of true love. But as the years draped their heavy curtain over my shoulders, those sacrifices began to weigh on me like chains, casting long shadows across my heart. Catherine, my mother-in-law, was the embodiment of ruthless criticism personified in pearls and pristine suits. From the moment we first met in her grand Victorian mansion, she saw me as a threat to her absolute control over Samuel, her beloved son. Her steel blue eyes and razor-sharp tongue never missed an opportunity to point out my flaws, each criticism delivered with surgical precision. The house, though beautiful with its antique furnishings and crystal chandeliers, felt like a gilded cage where I could barely breathe. Every word I spoke was met with contempt, every action scrutinized under her microscope of disapproval. Catherine's very presence served as a constant reminder that I would never truly belong in this world of old money and rigid traditions. "You are nothing but a burden to my son," she often whispered to me in a low, venomous voice, and the words ran down my spine like ice. Samuel, my husband, caught in Catherine's web of manipulation like a butterfly in a spider's web, would only turn away, his silence cutting deeper than any knife. That evening, the tension in the house reached a breaking point. Dinner had always been a ritual of humiliation for me, but tonight it transformed into an emotional battlefield. Catherine, maintaining her usual air of superiority, began her interrogation about my inability to conceive. "Why haven't you given us grandchildren yet?" she asked with a smile cloaked in malice. Her words pierced my heart. She continued, her voice very cold, "Samuel deserves better, and our family needs someone worthy of the family name." I felt the color drain from my face as I lowered my eyes, fighting back tears that threatened to betray my composure. Catherine moved closer, her hatred-filled eyes boring into me as she delivered her cruel verdict, "You'll never be good enough." Each syllable was laced with poison, designed to destroy whatever was left of my self-worth. At that moment, Samuel entered the room, drawn by the escalating voices that echoed through the marble halls. His eyes met mine for a brief instant, and I caught a glimpse of guilt and regret shadowing his handsome features. But he quickly looked away, unable or unwilling to face the reality of what was happening. "Samuel," I said, my voice trembling but determined, like a candle flame fighting against the wind. "Tell me what she's saying isn't true." Samuel maintained his silence, his face as immobile as the marble statues that lined the garden outside. I felt my heart shatter again, but this time something changed inside me. In that clear moment, I realized that only I could save myself from this hell. I could no longer wait for Samuel to protect me, nor could I continue to endure the malice of Catherine, who was continually sarcastic. I turned and walked to the door. The sound of my heels hit the marble floor like a metronome marking time until release. "Where do you think you're going?" Catherine's voice rang out, shock penetrating her usual iron control. "You have nowhere to go. Without this house, without us, you're nothing." I paused with my hand on the doorknob, the cool brass beneath my fingers grounding me in reality, and turned to face Catherine. For the first time in years, I felt a genuine smile curve my lips as I spoke. "I'd rather be nothing than live as someone else's shadow." With those words hanging in the air like a declaration of independence, I walked out of that house. I left behind not just the walls that had imprisoned me, but the shell of the woman I had become over those suffocating years. The night outside was dark and cold, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could breathe freely, feeling the fresh air filling my lungs. I knew the road ahead would be treacherous, that I would have to face this harsh world alone like a ship navigating through stormy seas. But at the same time, I felt elated to have taken the first step toward freedom. As I wandered through the unpopular streets, a plan began to form in my mind. Although it was still unclear how this would be accomplished, I was determined to regain control of my life and rebuild my life. The pain still lingered within me, a dull ache in my chest, but it was no longer about mere survival, it was about something deeper, more profound. As the night wore on, I kept moving forward, each step moving me further away from the past. In my soul, a new resolve began to take shape. Catherine and Samuel had underestimated my strength, believing they could crush me like a delicate flower beneath their feet. But I was done being their victim, finished with playing the role of the sacrificial lamb. I decided to be reborn. With this burning resolution in my heart, I disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind not just a house, but a life that had never truly been mine. The path was not yet clear, but the idea of revenge was beginning to form in my mind. I strengthened my resolve to reclaim my life and dignity, preparing myself to face the demons who had tried to break me. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a battle to rediscover myself and claim the place in the world that I deserved. The night I left Catherine and Samuel's house, I abandoned not just a physical structure of brick and stone, but also the version of myself that had been sculpted by years of contempt and humiliation. Walking through the cold city streets, my determination to reclaim my life grew stronger with each step, like a flower pushing through concrete. There was no turning back now, the bridge to my past life burning bright behind me. I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to be reborn like a phoenix rising from the ashes. This would be my renaissance as a stronger, more confident woman, no longer bound by the chains of others' expectations. The months that followed were a time of transformation for me. Having once defined my value by the opinions of others, I began to look at my own personal growth. I started a rigorous exercise routine and enrolled in self-development courses, each new day bringing fresh challenges and opportunities for growth. Day by day, I felt my strength growing, as if I were shedding an old skin and emerging anew. I was slowly but surely reclaiming the life that had been stolen from me. But deep down inside, the wounds were still raw, a slow-burning fire of revenge coursing through my veins. I had certainly become a woman who took my destiny into her own hands. I understood that this path wouldn't be strewn with rose petals. But I knew each step was bringing me closer to my goal, like a chess player moving her pieces with deliberate precision. My revenge wouldn't be a wild, violent storm, it would be more like a subtle poison. It becomes a psychological game, a power dance, that will surely drive them to the edge of insanity. I later learned from our former housekeeper, Martha, about the turmoil that was unfolding in the house I'd left behind. Martha told me that Samuel was becoming increasingly restless by my absence. During our weekly phone calls, Martha revealed that Samuel was beginning to question the decisions he'd made under his mother's influence, the doubt eating away at his certainty like rust on metal. According to Martha, cracks began to appear in his and Catherine's once solid relationship. Martha confided that Samuel was caught in an emotional tug-of-war between his loyalty to his mother and his growing regret over how he had treated me. It was like watching a rerun of my own marriage. The way Catherine's influence could twist and turn even the strongest bonds. Martha wasn't surprised to tell me that Samuel had started distancing himself from Catherine, much like I had done in my final months there. She observed Catherine's increasing paranoia during her daily duties in the house, though I couldn't help but wonder if it was paranoia or just the natural consequence of her controlling nature finally backfiring. From what Martha described, Catherine was like a spider whose web was slowly unraveling, strand by strand. It reminded me of my own mother's words from years ago: the tighter you hold on to something, the more likely it is to slip through your fingers. The irony wasn't lost on me. Catherine's desperate attempt to maintain control was the very thing causing her to lose it. As I listened to Martha's updates, I felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that truth was finally emerging, and sadness for the years we'd all lost to Catherine's manipulation. It was like watching a play I'd already performed in, but this time from the audience, with Martha as my faithful narrator. I finally decided it was the perfect time for a reappearance. I orchestrated what would appear to be a chance encounter with Samuel at his favorite downtown cafe, where Martha had mentioned he still took his morning coffee. When Samuel saw me, I could read the mixture of relief and guilt that washed over his face like waves on a stormy shore. His eyes widened as he took in the changes in me, the straight posture I'd cultivated through months of yoga, the determination that now lived in my eyes, and the serene confidence that seemed to unsettle him. "Michelle, I had no idea you were still in town," he stammered, trying and failing to hide the tremor in his voice. I met his gaze with a subtle yet calculated smile, one I had practiced countless times in my mirror at home. "I've been here all along, Samuel, I just needed time for myself. Time to grow, to heal, to become who I really am." The conversation flowed naturally, but beneath the gentle banter, I had already planted seeds of doubt in Samuel's mind. I shared stories of my transformation, painting vivid pictures of my journey to self-discovery and my new outlook on life. Samuel hung on to every word like a drowning man clutching a life preserver, desperately seeking the peace he saw reflected in my eyes. Gradually, like water seeping through cracks in a dam, I began to flow back into Samuel's life. But this time I was clearly in power. I became his confidant, the sympathetic ear for his complaints about Catherine, watching as his mother transformed in his mind from protective parent to the source of all his problems. I deftly manipulated the situation, never directly accusing Catherine of anything, but throwing in subtle comments that fueled Samuel's growing animosity toward his mother. It was like watching a master plan unfold, each piece falling perfectly into place. Through my weekly calls with Martha, I learned about the unraveling of Catherine's iron grip on her son. Martha told me how Catherine, who had always maintained complete control over Samuel, was beginning to notice the changes in him with growing alarm. According to Martha's detailed observations, Samuel became increasingly distant from Catherine, not listening to her suggestions and making his own decisions for the first time in his life. The housekeeper described how this loss of control was visibly affecting Catherine, making her behavior more erratic with each passing day. Martha said she would often find Catherine pacing the halls late at night, muttering about someone poisoning her son's mind against her. Though she was desperately trying to identify the culprit, Martha told me with a hint of satisfaction in her voice, Catherine couldn't figure out who was behind these changes. In our last conversation, Martha described how this uncertainty was pushing Catherine closer to the edge, making her increasingly unstable. And in a twist of irony that wasn't lost on me, Martha explained how Catherine's growing instability was only serving to push Samuel even further away. Martha's description brought it all vividly to mind for me. The way Catherine's perfectly arranged world was crumbling. One afternoon over coffee at our usual meeting spot, Samuel finally crumbled under the weight of his home's constant tension and confessed to me. His voice was thick with exhaustion as he ran his fingers through his once perfectly groomed hair, now slightly disheveled from stress. "I don't know what to do anymore, Ava," he whispered, his handsome features twisted with anguish. His next words tumbled out like a dam breaking. "Mother's become someone I don't recognize anymore. She's so controlling, and there's no reasoning with her. I feel like I'm losing my mind." I had waited patiently for this moment, like a hunter waiting for the perfect shot, though my face showed only gentle understanding and compassion. Looking into his troubled eyes, the same eyes that had once looked at me with such love and then such indifference, I spoke softly but deliberately. I assured him, carefully measuring each word, "Samuel, you are not alone. Sometimes the people we love aren't who we thought they were, they show us their true colors when we least expect it." I paused, letting my words sink in before continuing. I'm not trying to speak ill of your mother, but maybe it's time you started thinking about yourself for a change? About what you really want from your life. My words settled over him like a heavy blanket, and I could see them working their way into his consciousness. I watched as the seeds of doubt I had planted began to take root in his mind, spreading like ivy across an old wall. He started questioning everything. Whether he had ever truly known his mother, whether his entire life had been lived under someone else's control. These doubts grew stronger with each passing day, until every interaction with Catherine became a test of his endurance. I could see the transformation in his eyes, from confusion to realization, like watching a sunrise slowly illuminate a darkened landscape. Martha's next update revealed a new twist in our unfolding drama. She told me how Catherine, desperate to regain control over Samuel, had begun investigating my life with the intensity of a private detective. According to Martha, who overheard Catherine's phone calls, she suspected I was behind Samuel's changing attitude. Martha explained how Catherine had discovered my work at the women's shelter, where I helped survivors of domestic abuse. Through her network of social connections, Martha continued, Catherine had learned how I was using my own experiences to guide other women toward freedom. Martha described the moment Catherine realized this truth. How her face had turned pale and her hands had trembled while reading the newspaper article about our shelter's work. The housekeeper noted with a hint of satisfaction that Catherine had finally understood I was no longer the meek, compliant woman she had once despised. Instead, Martha said, Catherine now saw me as someone who had found their inner strength. A real threat to her carefully constructed world. Martha's voice grew tense as she told me how Catherine, in her desperation, had decided to confront me directly. She's planning something, Martha warned me during our last call, and she's like a cornered animal, more dangerous than ever. With calculated warmth, I accepted Catherine's invitation to discuss Samuel. When she suggested that I come to the mansion, I realized that a final confrontation was approaching. I agreed with a gracious smile. As I crossed the threshold of that grand house once more, Catherine's stern face greeted me with barely concealed hostility. I know what you're doing, Michelle, she spat out the words like venom, trying to take my son away from me. But I won't allow it. I met her fury with the calm confidence I had cultivated over months of preparation. I am not taking Samuel away from you, I replied in a steady voice. He is leaving of his own volition. He is finally seeing you for what you really are. I paused, letting my next words land with precision. Perhaps it's time for some self-reflection. To understand why everyone you claim to love eventually leaves you. I watched my words strike her like arrows finding their mark. For a moment, I saw the mighty Catherine falter, her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble around her. But like a wounded animal, she lashed out. You have no right to come here and destroy what I've built, she snarled with unbridled rage. Everything I've done has been for my son, she declared, her voice trembling with desperate conviction. I regarded her with a mixture of pity and steel in my gaze. That's the lie you've told yourself all these years, I said softly, but you can't hide the scars you've left anymore. Samuel deserves better, and deep down, you know it. I watched as Catherine's perfect mask began to crack, revealing the desperate woman beneath. But instead of surrendering, I saw something dangerous flash in her eyes. A decision being made. At that moment, I sensed she was preparing to unleash some dark family secret, a final weapon to regain control over Samuel and destroy me completely. I'll do whatever it takes, she whispered, madness dancing in her eyes. Samuel is mine. I won't let you have him. I left the mansion then, more certain than ever that I was on the right path. I knew Catherine wouldn't give up easily, but I was no longer the frightened woman she could intimidate. I was prepared for whatever storm was coming. The psychological warfare wasn't over, but this time, I held the higher ground. Martha called me late that evening with troubling news about Catherine's state of mind. She described finding Catherine alone in her room, surrounded by old photographs of Samuel as a child. According to Martha, tears were streaming down Catherine's face as she whispered over and over, "Everything I did was for you, everything." Martha's voice trembled as she told me how she had noticed doubt beginning to crack Catherine's ironclad certainty. She said she could sense Catherine's growing awareness that her control over Samuel was slipping away like sand through her fingers. Martha explained that the eerie calm before the storm was like darkness descending on the mansion. As night fell, she told me, a sense of impending doom had spread through the house, affecting everyone within its walls. Martha revealed that Catherine, consumed by paranoid fears of losing her son, had realized she needed to act quickly. With growing concern, Martha confided that Catherine had mentioned having a secret, one that would serve as her final trump card. Though Martha didn't know what this secret was, she warned me that Catherine seemed willing to use it even if it meant destroying their family bonds completely. "She's desperate to get Samuel back," Martha whispered into the phone, "and desperate people are capable of anything." The fear in Martha's voice told me more than her words. Something terrible was brewing in that house. Meanwhile, I had never been clearer about the path I needed to take. I was in no hurry and was completely determined to get Samuel back. In my heart burned an unshakable certainty that no one would ever manipulate me again. I had transformed from a pawn into a queen on this board of life. The scars of my past had become my armor, each painful memory strengthening my resolve to face Catherine's games head-on. As the night grew deeper, enveloping the city in its velvet darkness, an eerie silence settled over the mansion. But beneath that superficial calm, tension swirled, and I sensed an oncoming storm. The quiet before this storm was different from my past silences. This time, I was the one in control. Each tick of the clock brought us closer to our final confrontation, and I was ready for whatever Catherine had planned. The woman who had once trembled before Catherine's cold stare was gone, replaced by someone who could weather any storm. I sat in my apartment, watching the city lights flicker like stars, and felt a strange peace settle over me. This was the calm of a warrior who knows her strength, not the false quiet of a victim waiting for the next blow. Martha's late-night call revealed the desperate plans unfolding at the mansion. Through her hushed whispers, she told me how Catherine was plotting to reclaim Samuel, planning to expose a long-buried secret. According to Martha, Catherine understood this revelation might destroy her own life, but she seemed prepared to take that risk. Meanwhile, Martha observed Samuel becoming increasingly agitated and confused. She noticed how my presence in his life was stirring up buried emotions. Martha described how our interactions seemed to remind him of what we once shared, while simultaneously filling him with guilt over abandoning me when I needed him most. She could see Samuel being torn between his mother's manipulation and my newfound authenticity, slowly losing his emotional balance. The situation reached its climax, Martha told me breathlessly, when Catherine finally decided to reveal her long-held truth to Samuel. Martha described how Catherine summoned Samuel to her private study, the very room where she had orchestrated every aspect of his life. She heard Catherine's trembling voice asking Samuel to sit down. Through the door, Martha heard every word of their fateful conversation. Catherine began by telling Samuel she had kept a secret for years, one that would deeply affect his relationship with me. When Samuel asked what she meant, Catherine took a deep breath and delivered the shocking truth, that my infertility was no accident. Martha's voice shook as she repeated Catherine's confession. How she had manipulated medical records and created false diagnoses to ensure I couldn't have children. Catherine's justification, as Martha recounted it, was that she believed I wasn't worthy of Samuel, and she wanted to protect him from what she considered an ordinary life. Martha described Samuel's reaction in vivid detail. How he stood up, his face ashen with shock, crying out in disbelief. She quoted his exact words, "This can't be true." "Mother, you're lying." But Catherine, through her tears, only confirmed the horrible truth, insisting everything was done for Samuel's sake. Martha told me how the revelation shattered Samuel completely. She watched him storm out of the house without a word, leaving Catherine alone with her tears and regrets. The truth that was meant to bind them had only torn them further apart. I was in my little garden, tending to the roses I had spent the last few months painstakingly cultivating, when Samuel showed up. I looked up at him and saw the swirling anguish and confusion in his eyes. "What's wrong, Samuel?" I asked in a calm voice, though my heart was pounding like a drum beneath my composed exterior. His voice trembled as he confronted me with that devastating truth. "Did you know what Mother did to you? Did you know she manipulated everything, making it impossible for you to have children?" I felt his words sink in as silence drifted between us for a moment. Then, shaking my head slowly, I replied, "No, I didn't know. But I can't say I'm surprised." Samuel collapsed into a nearby chair as if his strings had been cut, the weight of this revelation crushing him like an avalanche. She destroyed our lives, Ava. She destroyed everything." Feeling the raw pain in his words, I moved to his side and took his hand in mine, a gesture that felt both familiar and new. "Not everything is destroyed, Samuel. We still have the truth. And with that truth, we can begin to heal and rebuild. It won't be easy, though. Your mother committed an unforgivable sin, but we both made mistakes in letting her control us." Our conversation stretched on like the lengthening shadows of the afternoon. We shared our pain, our anger, our frustrations. Emotions that had been buried for far too long. Yet among the ruins of the past, we also discovered the possibility of a new beginning, one built on our own choices rather than Catherine's lies. For the first time in years, Samuel saw me for who I really was. Not as the woman my mother despised, but as the strong, supple, unbreakable being I had become. In the gentle light of my garden, surrounded by the flowers I had brought back to life, we began to see a path forward through the darkness. Later that evening, Martha called me with news about Catherine's state. Through her quiet sobs, Martha described finding Catherine alone in her room, confronting the ghosts of her past like a woman facing her own reflection in a shattered mirror. According to Martha, Catherine had finally realized she had lost Samuel forever. The housekeeper explained how Catherine's confession, rather than bringing the liberation she had hoped for, had only plunged her deeper into despair. Martha's voice grew heavy as she described watching Catherine finally understand that all her actions, disguised as love and protection, had been nothing more than pure selfishness and a need for control. "She just sits there," Martha whispered into the phone, staring at nothing, finally seeing how she's lost everything because of her own actions. In all her years of service, Martha told me, she had never seen Catherine so utterly broken, so completely stripped of her usual power and control. The mighty Catherine had finally crumbled under the weight of her own manipulations. Together, Samuel and I returned to his family home for our final confrontation with Catherine, the mansion's shadows seeming longer and darker than ever before. With pain and determination etched across his handsome features, Samuel faced his mother like a man finally breaking free from golden chains. "Mom, I loved you, I believed in you," he said emphatically, his voice trembling. "But I can no longer be a part of your life. You destroyed too many things and hurt too many people. Ava and I deserve a chance to start our lives over, away from your influence." Even in her defeat, Catherine tried one last time to justify her actions, like a drowning person grasping at straws. But Samuel stood firm, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Your love was suffocating, Mother. You broke me. But now, for the first time, I see everything clearly. I won't be part of your world anymore." I took Samuel's hand in mine, meeting Catherine's gaze with unwavering determination. It's time to face what you've done, I said in a clear voice. We will face it. And you should face it too. We left Catherine alone in her empty house, forced to confront the bitter reality that her desperate need for control and power had driven her into complete isolation. Samuel and I walked out together, carrying hope for a new beginning in our hearts. Yet we both knew the path to healing would be long and challenging, like a winding road through treacherous mountains. Our story ended with a reflection on the price of control and manipulation, and the transformative power of forgiveness and redemption. Though the scars of the past would never completely fade, Samuel and I chose to find our way forward together, finally free from the shadows Catherine had cast over our lives. Like a flower breaking through concrete, our love has survived and would now bloom in the sunlight of truth and freedom.
If you enjoyed this story, please share your thoughts in the comments. If you have experienced similar betrayal, feel free to share your insights. We would appreciate it if you could like this video, share it with friends and family, and subscribe to our channel. An amazing story is already queued up on your screen, so don't miss out. The best entertainment is right here. See you in the next video.